It's about time. It's 5. Good evening, everyone, and thank you again as we move toward the end of week number 10. Wow. Week number 10. A reminder, no Memorial Day Mountain Time at 5. We have, I think, a special show for you today. Before we get started, let's get started. Here is Marianne Magarelli with a 60-second announcement.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just want to invite all those who have acted before or haven't and are just wanting to learn a little and have a little fun in a very social way. We are having what we are calling Improv with the Best of Us. We are inviting actors, would-be actors, and those who just want to have fun to join us on Sunday afternoon. If you have not already seen the email with the postings and such, do, if you will, put something in the chat that I could look at later, and I will try to send it out to you if you are interested. It will be a Zoom meeting, and we are planning to have an absolute blast. So come and join us, improvise with us. We describe all of the games and everything so you can have a great time and learn and just have a blast being fun.
Great, thanks. And it's when? Sunday afternoon when?
Sunday afternoon from 1 to 3.
1 to 3. All right, you can join anytime. And if folks have questions, send that to assistance@nfbco.org. Thanks, Marianne. Eileen and Nate, are you with us?
We are. I am.
Yes.
Do this.
All right. Well, the Wild West is hosting our first virtual open mic night on Saturday the 23rd, starting at 6:30. It's going to be a pretty fun show. We got a lot of different acts coming on. We got some people singing. We got some comedy acts. We got some poetry. Got a little bit of everything. It's going to be actually a pretty good show. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Sweet G.
So this is Eileen, aka Sweet G. That's who I'll be that evening. And Nate is MC Cinnamon. And Nate, I just wanted to tell you one joke before. Everything Nate said was true. We're going to have a blast, but I have to get this joke out. So, why is the smartwatch wearing, or the smartphone wearing glasses?
Why?
I have no idea.
I heard he lost his contacts.
Okay.
And there we have it.
All right, how do we get the Zoom coordinates, Nate and Eileen, for this extravaganza?
They are on Colorado Talks, but I will also paste the Zoom link into the chat right now.
Groovy?
Awesome.
Absolutely. All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. A lot of fun Memorial Day weekend stuff, Jess.
All right. So tomorrow we're going to have an exciting philosophy discussion. Next week is going to be a great because we're all going to celebrate the holiday on Monday. On Tuesday, we're going to have a person who's going to assist us with some financial planning, and Wednesday we're going to have a workout day. Not quite sure what the rest of the week looks like, but you can see our announcement as it goes out on Colorado Talk or find it on our National Federation of the Blind of Colorado Facebook page. And if you don't see it any of those places, you can send us an email to assistance@nfbco.org. I'm going to turn it over to Maureen.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again. I'm just going to put out another reminder of our phone number. So that number is 303-778-1130, extension 219. And you can call this number if you have any issues related to COVID-19 or any questions, if you want to become a member of the National Federation of the Blind, or if you have had any trouble with Lyft or Uber because of your guide dog, please call that number as well. You can also email assistance@nfbco.org. And I also just want to mention, if you have time, check out the Breaking Blind podcast.
Yeah.
You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And there's 3 episodes up there now, and they are all about some basic cane travel taught by David Neatfeld, who was an ONMC and a woodworking teacher, and just an amazing cane traveler. So check it out.
Scott Labar.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. I just want to thank Mike May for coming. and being part of our Mountain at 5 hour this evening. We really appreciate it. And I want to salute Kevin Worley for the great Blind Coloradan that he just put out this week. Make sure you read it. A lot of very interesting stuff in it and informational tips and tricks you can use. So that's all I've got. Thanks again. And I'm looking forward to hearing Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. We appreciate it. Well, the headline or the title of the biography written about our guest, Mike May, is the first line is Crashing Through, which is really his life story, but it also could be the tale of Scott LaBar and Kevin Worley at an airport. But Mike, good afternoon and welcome to the madness and the mayhem of Mountain Time at 5.
I love it. I think I saw 49 participants on there. You got a lively group.
Yeah, we did. We usually catch Thursday gets sometimes into the 70s and 80s. I think that our numbers are dwindling a little bit as the COVID-19 sort of crisis evolves and people find other things to do, but it's really brought a lot of blind people together.
And we're up to 61 now.
61?
Nice.
Well, that's because Mike started talking.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
How are you, man? You doing
Well,
well?
yeah, I consider myself an honorary Coloradan because I was born in Denver, and now that I live in Wichita, the only place to go skiing from here conveniently is Colorado, so that's where I get several times a year. And then I used to be out there 2 or 3 times a year when I was on the board of USABA, so I was right there in your backyard banging around downtown and Phantom Canyon and other places.
Nice. Yeah. Phantom Canyon, they're open. You can get deliveries right now. They're open. But also, since we're going to try to jump around a little bit, when you were searching for Sendero funding, you had some funders from Colorado, as I recall.
Oh, I did. The Jim Meisner from Beyond Sight was my original partner in getting that thing off the ground, and was with me for a long time. And then a friend of his that he brought in. So yeah, that was really fundamental to getting Sendero going.
Yeah, you want to talk a little about Sendero since we're just going to skip around a bit?
Sure. Sendero was founded late 99, 2000, and believe it or not, for a number of years, I had the hardest time convincing anybody. I was just on my lonely soapbox, and a lot of people said, well, blind people get around fine. Why do they need this expensive, bulky stuff? And rehab would not fund it for anybody. If you went to them and said, well, I need to get around better, and I need this GPS technology in order to facilitate my job or finding a place to live or whatever, they'd say, no, forget it. They wouldn't justify it. I think it was probably 2003 or so before we had our first paid GPS order, which for any adaptive technology company is fundamental to being successful. You've got to be able to get some of that state funding.
And then when did you go on the Braille Notes?
Braille Notes sort of in the 2002 or 3 was the first Braille Note versions, and then Humanware came along with the Trek.
Yeah.
And that was really where things started working, was once we had competition and other people said, hey, this is kind of a cool thing. I think I'm going to build some sort of GPS. And then there was Captain from France, and others got on that bandwagon, and it started to grow and give people options. And as you know, in the end, we all have different needs and preferences and economic levels. And so having options is really part of making the equation work.
Your Sendero, what was the name of the product? I can't remember, that was on the Braille, loaded on the Braille Note.
Braille Note GPS. The first one was Strider, which was 1995, which was what we developed at Arkenstone. And I was just digging it out the other day. I'm going to send it to APH because they have a museum there, and they're going to build up a museum of all the old clunky GPS stuff.
Yeah. So the first one I got, Nijat, my son, who may be on this call, he and I both got it at a convention, and we just had a ball. Now, it was kind of expensive back then. I think we paid $59 or $69 or some nuttiness. But boy, it was the first sort of accessible GPS that we could play with.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that the reason for the GPS and sort of the fundamentals of it are the same now as they were in 1995 when we worked on the first version, which is if we're going to appreciate and make the most of our environment, we need to know what's around. What is our equivalent of print signs? And so what's changed is the size, but that same need and that same functionality has not changed in 25 years. And of course, there's more information available now, and there's more things that are equivalent of print signs, but it's still the same sort of thing. And there's still lots of room for improvement.
And it's interesting that you were having trouble getting funding because people thought it wasn't worthwhile, and yet now think of everything we have for the services for blind and vision impaired people. You got, beyond, you've got, IRA and all kinds of amazing apps, technology, human interfaces. We're in an amazing, crazy tech time.
Yeah, the other real big transition in all of this was kind of the iPhone came along in 2007. And so around 2010, 12, people started shifting to apps, of course. And that completely changed the whole business model because nobody wants to pay more than a
Yeah,
few bucks for an app.
yeah,
And so you have a situation where the iPhone model is high volume, low cost. Well, there is no high volume among blind people, not the kind of volume that drives the prices down to 99 cents.
right.
There aren't a million blind users, so you can't make it work economically. So we funded things through a lot of grants.
Yeah,
But the other thing that changed really is that you had to give up some functionality. People just said, well, I can do everything I need to do on my iPhone. I don't need to haul around a Braille Note or a PackMate or some of this other stuff. And the truth is, we gave up, a lot of people gave up functionality and productivity in the trade-off between those bigger devices and the convenience of having an all-in-one cell phone thing in your pocket.
yeah. And some
And
of
it's
that,
still true.
yeah, some of that we experienced obviously, and you've been engaged in the whole technology world, so but we engaged, we dealt with some of that in our KNFB reader. We were the first
Right.
ones in the
Same
National
thing.
Federation of the Blind. Same kind of a thing where the first unit was, carrying around a big old thing that sort of kind of worked, and it certainly showed what we could build. But now we're down to an app with whatever functionality it has.
Yeah, well, I have my iPhone, but I also have a Braille Note PK sitting on my lap, and that would be considered a dinosaur. But so far, there's no Braille device that's that size that has all the functionality. You got to add on something else, a Windows PC or an iPhone or something to make it work, and now you have multiple pieces. So I use lots of devices, but I still like my PK.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. I absolutely get it. So would you describe yourself as sort of, were you involved in the serious development of the technology, or were you sort of the CEO, big vision guy? Did you like really drill down into the development of this stuff? You consider yourself a technologist, or sort of the entrepreneur who had the big vision and went off and raised the bucks?
A bit of both, because to be motivated and to be in a field that's, you're not going to get rich, but you want to make a living kind of perspective. Everybody wears a hat. Everybody makes the coffee and takes out the garbage. So um, I had to get into the nitty gritty in terms of the product development. I'm not a programmer. I'm a pretty techie guy. I'm pretty, a good button pusher, and I like figuring out all of those details. We had Charles LaPierre, who was really the heart and soul of the programming and the development of the early technology until we went to the iPhone. But you also have to have a vision and look at, how are we going to fund this thing? Everybody, whether I like it or not, everybody wants an app version of the GPS. How are we going to get that funded? And so I came up with a couple of clever ways to do that.
Well, you're a clever guy. I think going back to the whole cost of the thing, and how many users. We'll move on to some other topics here, but I worked for a little while as a consultant for IRA, and they had a little bit of a I mean, they thought they were going to just get millions of blind people from all over the world that just would stand in line to pay $300 a month. And I kept saying, y'all, this ain't going to happen. And ultimately, they've had to reorganize, retool, reinvent. But I give them credit, they've done those things. You know, they have retooled,
Right.
reinvented themselves, which is what you have to do. And I think you did a lot of that at Sendero.
Well, you know, it's really all about the workarounds. And so I enjoy technology, but in the end, I want to get where I want to go independently, and I want to enjoy it. And I like the feeling of, you know, being a little kid discovering things.
Mm-hmm.
And technology just happens to be a way to get that done. And so certainly back in 95 and even 2005, GPS needed to be built and developed so that it could add that element to discovering the world. But it's not about the technology, it's about the trip.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that reminds me, tell me what Sendero means.
Pathway, Sendero.
Sendero, pathway. And I love
Yeah.
that because we talk a lot about that with Maureen and Jessica, all of us who are into wellness and your life path, your life pathway. And so I just love that name, how it fits into the GPS. Can we shift and talk a little about your athletic endeavors? Because we are in Olympic City, USA. That's where we are down here with
Mhm.
Jessica and Kevin and I in the bunker. And we, of course, have had a great relationship with USABA. So tell us just briefly about some of your athletic adventures, because I find them compelling and find them very helpful.
Yeah. Well, a lot of them, it comes back to workarounds again, other than things like wrestling, which, you know, a lot of blind people have done, and there's not a lot of modification involved, or swimming. I did wrestling up into a couple years into college, but the thing that really caught fire with me, of course, was skiing. And there's a lot of workarounds you have to sort out, particularly when you're racing and working out that whole scheme. So back when I first started in around 1980, there wasn't much going in terms of racing, and so I helped to pioneer that. And at that point, um, people were really recreational skiing with the guide behind the skier and skier in front, which doesn't really give you as much precision. It's easier on the guide, but it's less benefit to the blind skier. And we switched it up and developed that technique of the guide going in front. When we went to the first version of the Winter Olympics in 1982 in Switzerland, we were the only pair racing with the guide in front, and we won by a lot, you know, 30 seconds or something. And they almost disqualified us because they said, wait a minute, you can't do it that way. It's not safe. and and so, you know, I won 3 gold medals. That was great. But the bigger achievement really was when I came back to the next international games in 1984 in Austria. Everybody had switched to the guide in front. And guess what? I only took 3rd place.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah.
So I got beat by my own technique.
Yeah, absolutely. How often do you have to pioneer everything? I mean, is it seriously, is it a quest of yours to be a pioneer?
It is a quest. It's a quest right now as I'm locked down here in Kansas, figuring out where can I go? How soon can I get out of here?
Yeah, if I was in Wichita, I'd be feeling the same way. Except our good friend Tom Page.
Yeah.
And Tom Page has done a good job with this COVID-19. He's been doing these Facebook shows with his bluegrass.
Oh yeah.
And it's just he's a wonderful guy. And
yeah, I listen to all of those.
oh yeah, yeah. So that's just sort of your spirit, right? That's why it's crashing through.
It is. I like figuring stuff out. I love those workarounds, and it's not that, you know, I don't mind kicking back here and there a bit too and let somebody else figure it out. There's a lot of pioneers out there, but I enjoy hearing about their experience and seeing what people get done. So it's fun.
Now, where did that come from? That pioneer, resilient spirit?
I don't know. You know, I give my mother a lot of credit for many things in my nature,
Yeah.
and also being one of 5 kids. She just, I mean, I had 2 kids, and it was hard enough to keep up with them. I don't know how she managed 5 kids, and I think the benefit in terms of having a blind kid was parent cannot be overprotective if they're a single mom with 5 kids.
Yeah. You can't worry. Sometimes they'll go to the garage and, you know, cause an explosion.
Yeah, that's been known to happen.
Do you mind talking a little about that for our folks?
Yeah, well, that's of course the origin of being blind was at age 3 in Silver City, New Mexico, getting a hold of some calcium carbide, which is a powder that goes in miners' lamps,
I think it cures
putting it.
COVID. I think it cures COVID. Go ahead.
Yeah. All you have to do is just eat it. I don't mind doing it. Doesn't matter if it's not scientifically proven.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt, Mike.
Yeah, it makes it. You know, I have had chloroquine phosphate when I went to Ghana in 1976. That was the preventative we took for malaria,
Yeah.
and I got it anyway.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah,
Wow.
there's different strains of malaria. So,
So you went to
yeah,
hospital, you came out totally blind, right?
yeah. I got blown up, and I had over 400 stitches, and barely survived. So, being blind was a pretty decent concession.
Yeah, absolutely. I have not talked to too many people on these shows that have actually gotten, blown up. That's kind of a big deal. So how was school, school and growing up years?
Um, I had, a lot of wonderful teachers, and whenever I give people credit for stuff, I think of Mrs. Lincoln in 4th grade and Mr. Medina, my VI teacher. I really liked the fact that in those days, um, it was sort of the hybrid between a school for the blind and what you have now when you're at a school and you have to have an O&M instructor drive to get, to come see you, and a VI teacher. We were bunched up in the same county in one school. So 15 blind kids, 600 sighted kids with a resource program. And so we got the services to learn Braille, and of course they weren't teaching cane techniques until 7th grade back then.
Yep.
But we learned those skills and got that support, but then we were also just mixed in the classroom, one blind guy in the classroom. And I like that because it was much more efficient in terms of the teacher's time, because they didn't have to spend it on the road going from class to class as they do today.
Yeah. I grew up in so many different settings, 3 schools for the blind, 1 school for the deafblind, several public schools with resource rooms because I was an Army brat. And I always enjoyed, some people didn't, I enjoyed that resource room setting where you might have 8 or 10 or 12 blind kids doing different things, but then you'd go out to the regular school setting to do the mainstreaming. That's one of the models I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and I got a good dose of my, blind compatriots at the Enchanted Hills Camp for the Blind in
Yeah.
Napa. The Lighthouse program that I went to from the time I was age 7 or 8, off and on, and then I worked there. And then my mother was the director, and I was assistant director, and so that place, if there's a place that's home for me anywhere in the world, that's it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful camp. I've been there. And of course, we have worked a lot with your friend and ours, Brian Bashan, who's one of the most imaginative services for the blind director you could ever have.
Absolutely, yeah.
Amazing. He was involved in one way or another with Sendero, wasn't he?
He was an active user, and of course, Brian will give you feedback actively. So got a lot of input from him on using the technology, and he was one of the people that appreciated something. To this day, there's something called Sendero Maps, which when we closed Sendero at the end of 2018, the Lighthouse took over Sendero Maps and IRA took over CNI GPS. And Sendero Maps is the software that runs on a PC that allows you to virtually explore block by block any place you want to go in the country or in the world where you have the maps. And it's really a fabulous way to find out about things before you get there and build a mental picture of where things are. And Brian was a big supporter and appreciator of that.
Yeah, I've been knowing Brian since the early days in our National Federation of the Blind in the 80s. And I do have a number of stories, but we will not share them on this particular Mountain Time 5. Also, I do recommend folks touch base with the Lighthouse in San Francisco. They're not a quote unquote NFB center, but boy, I tell you, they are doing some amazing work for blind people, from wellness and athletics to employment to some very fascinating, innovative stuff. They've got the Holman Prize, so they're doing some amazing things still.
Yeah, and they have team apps. So if you want a tactile map of any place, just send them your address. And they'll either send you the BRF file, you can emboss it yourself, or you pay a little something and they send you the map.
Yeah, they're good. Brian is he's a good man, and heck, he hired a blind architect. I mean, come on, that shows you some groovy stuff. So then you went off to college somewhere.
Yeah, I went to UC Davis and to Johns Hopkins, where I got my degree in international affairs. And that was, the best part of that was after being in Northern California all the way through college, I really needed to experience another part of the world. And Washington, D.C. was amazing in terms of that. And that's where I got involved with at NFB in 77, 79 with Jim Gashel and some others there in the D.C. office. In the Blind Bowling League and all sorts of things. But yeah, that's where I went to school.
So I want to talk a little about, well, first of all, talk about anything you want. We'll take some questions, but I want to hit two other topics. Do you mind, you went through something, we talk a lot about in the National Federation of the Blind and on some of these Mountain Time at 5 calls about resilience, about meeting challenges, about overcoming. Would you mind sharing, because I know you do on Facebook, would you mind sharing, you went through something that no parent would ever want to go through. And would you mind sharing a little about that time in your life and that difficult time?
Sure. 2016 was my year from hell. There's been a few others, but that was the worst. And in early January 2016, my son was lost in an avalanche, buried and not found for about 6 weeks. They searched for about 4 days with 400 or 500 people, and talk about trying to come up with workarounds. I mean, I vividly picture myself there surrounded by radios and phones, and it was Memorial Day week, or Martin Luther King weekend. It was hard to get a hold of people, trying to get radar technology and surveillance technology and everything else there was to find him, and it didn't happen. 6 weeks later, a dog, a rescue dog named Bojet, a German Shepherd, found him under 10 feet of snow.
Ugh.
And he was just about to be 24 years old. So people would write and say, well, there are no, I don't have any words, and there just aren't any
There aren't.
for that kind of experience. It's just devastating. It's with you for life, and I don't get over it.
Yeah, of course you don't. Oh, you never do. It's devastating when you lose your parents, but the parents are supposed to go first. So you can deal with that. Even now, I was thinking about, I lost my father 9 years ago yesterday. And of course I miss him and my mom every day. I want to pick up the phone and talk about baseball and fishing. But your son, that's just, ooh. So how long did it sort of take you, or did it take you some time to sort of jump back into your pioneer spirit? How did that transition work for you?
Well, it's a good question, Kevin, because people talk about their successes, but one doesn't really focus on all the trials and tribulations. And I'm not going to have a downer and go into that too much here.
Right.
But suffice it to say, and that the next bad thing that happened in that year is I got serious tonsil cancer, had to have radiation and chemo, and that knocked me flat, and I was miserable for months and in the hospital, and came pretty near checking out during that process. So that just really finished off 2016, put me in a really bad space. And I was thinking the other day, when I canceled 6 trips when this COVID thing came on, I said, well, the last time I did that was when I got cancer, and I canceled 9 trips. First time I hadn't been to the NFB convention in years.
Yeah, we took note of that.
Yeah, people do. You notice, how come you weren't there?
Oh yeah.
You are in hot water.
Cancer? What? Why weren't you here?
Yeah. So, but I think the pioneering thinking was always in the back of my mind, whether it was trying to figure out something about my son, and then we set up a foundation and trying to think of ways that I could come up with technology that would help somebody else in the same situation which we formed, and I haven't made enough headway on that as I would like, but we have made some. And then with the cancer, how do you deal with that? So it's relationships. It's always about figuring out those workarounds. And then I went to Seattle and decided I'm going to get out of the tech field and I'm going to get into um, management of a blindness agency, and that was a whole new chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, and you read this wasn't your first run-in with cancer, right?
Well, I had a couple of your typical basal cell removal things, no big deal. But
Oh, no big
when I had one, yeah, they are. I mean, these days there's lots of them, and they're pretty benign. But the immune suppressant drugs that I had to take when I had my stem cell transplant back in 2000, that gives you the possibility, that increases the possibility of you getting cancer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the trade-offs that were made when I was given the choice. Would you want to have an operation that can give you some vision or not?
Yeah. The reason I talked about some of these trials, tribulations, challenges is that, we talk about resilience, and people say to Maureen Neatfeld all the time, you've had 37 surgeries and brain surgeries, and you have this VHL and blindness, and yet you continue to persevere because, our guys, Mike, Maureen, we don't focus on what we can. We focus on finding a way to do. And I think that's just incredible, that you're willing to share that. Well, let's talk. People are fascinated. I got to admit, I'm fascinated about the whole, I was sighted, and then I blew up. So I was blind for a number of years. And then I was able to go through all this to get some vision back. Can you talk a little about that episode?
Yeah, I never thought of this as a possibility. It wasn't something that I was seeking, a medical solution to my blindness. The solutions I was always thinking about, the workarounds, all had to do with creating the GPS and figuring out education and employment and all the rest of these things. So when I was offered the opportunity, I almost didn't do it, and then I said,
How old were you?
43.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So lived most of my life as a blind person, and I didn't need anything. Life was good.
Yeah.
But I said, if you don't do it, Mike, then you're not being a pioneer, and that's who you are.
Yeah.
So you can't wimp out, even though there's risks of cancer. 50% of people who've had stem cell transplants and their eye fixed are successful. 50% aren't. There's the expense and the hassle, and it was right at the time we were starting Sendero. So that's not really what you should be doing, taking on two major life challenges at the same time.
Yeah, right.
But the one thing in the column that tipped the scale was curiosity and being a pioneer, and that's what tipped the scale for me to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Talk a little. I'm fascinated by this. This is what we're coming to that I personally am fascinated. So what did you see? What was it like for you? What did you see?
Well, I didn't expect that I would see anything for a while. And then we didn't know, well, how much will you see? So when I went in the day after the operation, he took the bandages off to change the dressing, and I could see stuff. Everybody was shocked. The doctor, my wife, there's light, there's objects, things are starting to take shape, and there's colors. Boom, there's colors. So after 43 years, so I was 46. So 43 years of not having any vision, just light perception in one eye, all of a sudden the visual faucet is turned on and I'm overwhelmed, living the world with this visual information one frame at a time.
Yeah. So what did you see? Tell us about what it looked like. What do you shapes? I'm doing this thing that people always do to blind people, right? They always say, well, how many fingers do I have up?
Oh, I know, yeah.
This is different. Tell us about the visual aspect. How do you perceived what you could see?
Well, this is the thing about vision, is it's not low, medium, and high. It turns out that our visual cortex processes all sorts of different things. So there's a section of your brain that processes face recognition, depth perception, detail like reading print, colors, motion. These things are all processed in a different part of the brain, which I learned later from the vision scientists, and I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Spending a lot of time with those neuroscientists. So I'm looking around the office. I see all these objects. Then we start walking through the hallway, and I'm seeing the patterns in the carpet,
Mhm.
and then the pictures on the wall. And we get outside, and I think one of the first things I was really mystified by, I was walking down a sidewalk, and I'm seeing these blue dots and red squiggles, and I said, "What are those? Are those like splotches of paint? Why are they there?" And of course, sighted people don't comment on this because they just ignore it as part of everyday life. But where there are gas lines and electric lines and different things, pipes, they've marked it on the ground.
Hmm.
And so these were just normal everyday markings on the sidewalks. I never knew in my entire life that they existed. The first time I went to a baseball game and I got a seat right directly behind home plate, and I could see the batter moving because I could see motion. I can't see detail,
Mhm.
and I could see that as they're getting ready with their swing, their feet are kind of pumping up and down, sort of up on tiptoes, up on their heels,
Mhm.
and there's this whole dance going on. I thought, all the years I've listened to baseball announcers, nobody's ever told me about their feet popping up and down.
Yeah.
It was just this funny discovery,
Yeah.
like, aha.
Yeah. Why didn't they do that? Ozzie Smith at the home plate with his feet going up and down.
Yeah.
I, I guess I'm fascinated about it a little bit because we have that sort of fun side conversation. I don't think folks in the National Federation of the Blind are folks who are sort of all of us in the same place. I don't think we think much, oh, I sure wish I had my sight. Most of us don't do that. We think of it like you did, although I've known some blind people who've been blind a long time who still say, oh, I would do almost anything. But I think most of us are pretty fine the way it is. I'm sort of fascinated by this whole discussion of visual cortex because in my case, that was the injury. I was born blind, a brain injury, and I had certain weird visions like you describe in the book, by the way, and until I was 17 or 18. Very little depth, very little field, a black and white, no color, but it was so fascinating to read the sort of the way you, and tell a little about the grocery store, like how, sort of overwhelming. Like, is this a can of chili or a box of Frosted Flakes? Tell a little about that.
Yeah, that was so much of the world was like that. And then you just triggered in my memory. I'll come back to it a little later. One of Brian Bashan's favorite stories, because by the way, he has Stephen Johnson's syndrome, and
Yeah.
he is in the rare category of also being a candidate for a stem cell transplant,
Huh.
and has elected not to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a grocery store, I think one of the most awkward discoveries I had was, I think I was in a Costco, and everything's huge in a Costco, and they have forklifts moving stuff around, and so I was hearing the forklift, and I saw something really huge in front of me, and I leaned over to my wife and I said, oh, is that a forklift? She says, no, that's a really wide person.
Thanks, honey.
It's like, oh boy, I hope I didn't say that too loudly. That is not a forklift.
That's awesome. Wonderful. What it triggered for me though is the multi-sensory approach. Like when you were, maybe not this is the exact way to say it, but sort of learning to see again, it all had to work together. Your little bit of sight, the crazy visions, what you remember from your touch memory, all of it sort of working together. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. Like you knew what a can felt like. So when you saw it, you're like, oh, round cylinder, must be can.
Right. And the tipping point in all of this stuff was, okay, turn on the faucet of vision. It's overwhelming, really overwhelming. And sometimes I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is too much. And a learning process that went on for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden it wasn't suddenly, I started evolving to the point where, you know what, if I find the right combination of where my vision tool works and where my blindness tools work, use the right tool for the right situation, then I had the best of both worlds. So for example, I'm walking down the sidewalk. If I try to use my vision to see where there's a step. I don't have any depth perception.
Yeah.
A shadow and a garbage can and a hole all kind of look the same to me. So I'm best not to use my vision for my mobility, but I can look around and enjoy the colors of the flowers. I can find that yellow house on the corner that's a landmark. Okay, now I've got some good additional travel vision. Use it for that. Don't use it for what's in front of me. And that took a while to evolve, and it took some bloody noses to get to figure that out.
And mine was sort of the other way. Like I learned how to use that light perception and that little visual orientation and counted on that travel vision. And then when I was 17, 18, it just sort of went away. And it's like, oh, wait, how am I going to find that opening without the light? You know, it just sort of went away. I was walking down the street with a bunch of college buddies, and I said, ooh, guys, I can't see. And they're like,
Oh,
dude,
jeez.
of course you can't see, you're blind, because I had so little vision. And they were teasing me and everything, but I couldn't see anymore. It just went away. And I
Wow.
think the way you describe using that vision is the way a lot of our blind folks do it, whether they were blindsided. You got Jessica Beecham over here. She's blind, but she has to find a way to integrate that travel vision, you know. You just did it
Yeah.
different than the rest of us. You approached it from, you did the blindness first. Let's see if we have folks who want to raise their hand. Scott LeBar said to me, oh, you're going to have Mike on here. Now, is he blind or sighted these days? I said, I don't know, I lost track.
You know, and when people ask me that question, they say, well, what can you see?
Yeah.
I just say I'm blind.
Yeah. I think, and the only reason we're asking about it here is because it's a bunch of blind folks who are curious.
Right. No, this is a different situation. I'm talking about sitting in an airport waiting
Oh,
room and people,
yeah,
my seatmate, and they ask me, because it's just too complicated to say, well, I have bad depth perception. I had good motion detection. I can see colors, blah, blah, blah.
Buy my book.
Yeah,
Buy my
true.
book. Or go
I'll just carry
to
them with me.
go to YouTube and listen to my interview on Mountain Time at 5, and you can learn all this stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
Want to raise your hand? You *9 under the More section or Alt Y.
See if we have any questions.
We've got Mary.
Mary, from where? Hi, Mary.
Mary's from Littleton. I'm pretty close to the Colorado Center.
Yeah, good. Go ahead, hon.
Question, when you started to regain your sight, how did blind people treat you? Was it any different?
That was a very delicate subject, Mary, because my blind friends were all, they were all cheerleaders, people like Brian and Jerry Coons and many others. They were curious. They wanted to know. They weren't jealous. But I did have one or two blind friends who just said, you've got everything going for you. Why did you get this opportunity? Why didn't I have it? They were jealous. And I went to an NFB, I think it was in Louisville, and Dr. Maurer said, I want to have dinner with you. And I thought, uh-oh. At a convention where he's busy. And this was right after the operation and all the media. And so we had a dinner up on the top of that Galt House place, wonderful dinner. And he was really concerned that all of the media and the movie and everything else would set blind people back years if there was this blockbuster movie that got blindness wrong. And he really wanted to make sure that, Mike, you got a lot of weight on your shoulders. You're getting all this attention. You better get it right. Because you're going to screw it up for other people. And I really took that responsibility seriously and was careful and conscientious in dealing with the media because I wanted my blind friends to be respected and for people to have the right attitude about this.
Well, you did it right. Clearly you did it right because you've never ever indicated that you're distant from blindness at all. You always, I feel like you really carried that to the media, and we're lucky about that. Who else do we have, Kev, on the hand raising business?
We got Sam Klassen.
Oh, Sam from Iowa. Come on in, buddy.
Unmute there.
Unmute Sam the man. Sam.
Okay, here we are.
There you go, bro.
Hey, Mike. It's nice to hear your voice. Sam Clausen from Iowa, as Kevin said. I had I came in late. I was that gene therapy that you had, or was it some kind
No,
of operation?
it was a combination, and we didn't actually say. First, I had a stem cell transplant of from a motorcycle victim, um, and that transplanted that tissue. Then 4 months later, I had a cornea transplant from another motorcycle person, and that's when the vision happened. So it was those two operations that led to my low vision recovery.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Let's see. Who else has a hand raised?
We got Holly.
Hey, Holly.
Hey, Kevin, it's Holly McKnight.
Go ahead.
Hey, um, Mike, I'm curious. I know you've used a guide dog for a long time, and I'm currently working dog number 5.
Wow.
When you did get your vision back, I know, like, for me, I've lost vision, and you have to change it, how you work with your dog when you're going that way. What about trusting her when you got your vision back? How did that work? And how did the school help you?
Um, it was tricky because I had a dog at the time, Josh, a golden retriever, and so I continued to work him, but I wasn't trusting him completely because I'm seeing things and second guessing, and so part of it was I was just distracted by my environment. But there were times where if you're paying attention to your dog, they let you know when you should be turning at a common place. And any number of times I missed those cues and ignored my dog.
Interesting.
And then that dog passed away, and I went without a dog for about 2.5 years, just focusing on the cane and thinking, do I really want the hassle of having a dog? And then I came back around and saying, I love dogs. I love the relationship. And so I'm going to do it again. So I'm on dog number 7.
Wow. I'm on dog number 1. I waited till I was 60 years old to decide.
All right.
Do a dog, and I it's one of the best. I mean, my wife is the best decision, but one of the very best. National Federation of the Blind's probably for the guide dog, but it's one of the best decisions. And I was a good cane traveler, very good. But I have found just an amazing sense of empowerment with traveling with a guide dog.
Yeah, the speed is wonderful with a dog.
Yeah.
You can really rock and roll.
Oh man, and if you trust the dog, the other day I was telling Kevin Kovacs over here, who's running the board, I was ambling down the street to the trails the other day, and I was fantasizing about, like I do, I dream, how can my $4 billion save the economy or whatever, opening my own string of radio stations or some crazy fantasy. And I came to, and I'm like, wait, whoa, we're 5 blocks down the street. I just sort of let Onyx take us where, just sort of spaced out.
Got to pay attention.
Yeah, got to pay attention. Who else do we have that has a hand raised?
Musam.
Oh, Musam, hi. Unmute, my friend.
He's unmuted.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you guys. Mike, I read the book. It was phenomenal. I have so many questions. I guess the one that really comes to the forefront of my mind now is a bit medical, so it's totally cool if it really can't be answered in this forum. But I was very curious. So there was a significant part in the story where you were talking to the vision scientists, right? And they were basically saying that when you lose your sight early, often the neurons in your visual cortex aren't able to, I guess a better way to phrase it, and obviously you would know best, is they kind of reassign themselves. So I know that at one point they were saying, well, maybe they're just gone, right? Like maybe they've already switched their roles. So that part of your vision, your brain, you will just never learn to see normally. I was wondering, do you know if it is significantly different for people who lose their sight much later in life? Like if those neurons have already formed, do they stay?
Right. Yeah. So your visual development is complete about age 6. So mine was interrupted at age 3.5. So some things didn't work. They're not entirely sure which things develop when. I think they have some prognosis about, let's say, the different elements I talked about: motion, depth perception, face recognition. So mine was interrupted. So if I had sight until I was age 6, there's a good chance that my vision would be good enough where I could drive and read now. So there's a huge difference in that evolution of development. And they said initially that the plasticity, the ability for your brain to relearn as an adult, is negligible. They say that that has actually changed a little bit, and that my depth perception, for example, has, where they said I had none. Well, they said, well, it's not 3D, but let's call it 2.5D.
Yeah.
It's changed a little bit. And of course, they can't figure out exactly what I've learned contextually and by just trying to outsmart the world.
Yeah.
What have I learned by thinking something through versus what has changed medically, optically.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing is that my eye would see 2040 if it weren't for my visual cortex issues. So the optics are really good, but the processor isn't.
So that's the same thing they would have said about my eyes. It's because of the brain injury. Yeah, your eyes are fine. We can't figure this out. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to any more doctors. But but anyway, yeah, it definitely changes a lot. Mike actually hears out of his eyes now. It's unbelievable.
Well, now you're facetious, but here's the deal.
Okay.
What happens is when your visual cortex is not being used for vision, it starts being used for other things like reading Braille. So your Braille reading is typically taking place in your visual cortex. And there's a very famous study about a woman in Spain who was a radio announcer and read Braille at the time she had a stroke, and when she came back to work, she couldn't read because her visual cortex had been destroyed.
Which is fascinating to me too, because a lot of people will say, well, you're a blind person, you don't have a learning disability because, and I'm like, wait, you can have, your brain is a great place, man. And when I had the brain injury, we finally figured out that the reason I couldn't learn Braille quickly is because I had a form of dyslexia. ST would always be CA,
Mm-hmm.
PR was Q. I can read 60 words a minute, but boy, it took a lot of work. So okay, let's do a couple of more hand raises if we have them.
Marianne.
Marianne.
Hi, I will apologize first if I ask something that somebody else did. I had to pop off for a little bit and get some lab results from the doctors and so on. For me, not my dog this time, but I was going to ask, when you first started seeing again and so on, were you still comfortable with the idea of using a cane or a dog or whatever mobility, whichever device you were using? And did I trust that you are not as crazy as the guy from quote unquote At First Sight that just decided he's going to walk out in the world with nothing in his hand and stand in the street and freak out over cars and stuff. And what do you use now?
I had a dog when I got my vision, and then a couple years in, that dog passed away, and I continued to just use a cane for a couple years before I got a dog again. So I'm quite comfortable with either a dog or a cane.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, Marianne, but thanks, because I know people do come in and out throughout these calls. We have a few more minutes. I think, do we have John Perret?
Yeah.
John Perret is with us. Go ahead, John.
Kevin and Mike, hey, this has been so interesting. Kevin, you are a fantastic interviewer, which I knew, and this is confirmed. And Mike, you have such an interesting story, which I knew, and this is confirmed. So I saw you were going to be on the show tonight. I didn't want to miss it. I think you've covered nicely up to this point. I'd like to hear maybe now a little bit about where you think you're going to go from here, or where technology for the blind is go from here. So using your foresight into being sort of a strategist, tell us a little bit about how you see the future.
Yeah, how do you get out of Wichita? That's in there too.
Yeah, well, well, there's an irony to the whole COVID thing, because I'm always trying to think about what are the workarounds. And at this point, I'm focusing on indoor navigation. Outdoors still needs improvement. We're working on that as well. So in my new venture at Access Explorer in Louisville, we're working on coming out with a navigation app this summer. And indoor navigation is the big focus because that's the new pioneering frontier for navigation. Well, there's a lot of challenges with that, and I won't go into that too much. But buildings need to be mapped, and airports need positioning, and all this stuff. We also are going to need, for everybody, not just blind people, something to help with contact tracing indoors, not just outdoors. So Apple and Google are working on coming up with an app to facilitate contact tracing. What about indoors? So that may really increase the demand for our products, for our ability to map buildings, which is one of the things that we offer. And in that process, I'm trying to think about, well, what do I need as a blind person? Because they're going to be putting up signs like, this is a one-way aisle, you have to go this way. And here's you can enter at this door and exit at this other door. And here's the 6-foot markers on the ground. How can we use technology to address those kinds of dynamic print signs in our environment?
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions on that. Some of them are even up on the YouTube record. People can go to our YouTube channel, National Federation of the Blind of Colorado YouTube channel. We've had a lot of conversations, of course, at our Colorado Center for the Blind about how we're going to do physical distancing. I mean, it's a whole new world for everybody. But I'll tell you what, it used to be aggravating when a person came up and grabbed me by both arms and propelled me into a chair I didn't want to sit to. Now it's more than aggravating. It's potentially, life-threatening. So
yeah, there was a great Facebook post of Peter Tusick, 6 foot distancing with his cane, and he would swing it around, tap in front of him, swing it around. So he had, 360 degree 6 foot clear path.
Yeah, again, like Scott LaBar and Kevin Worley in an airport, just crashing through. And the times I have been out, which is very little, I tell people, hey, blind guy coming through. I am not shy at all. I've got a wife who's very, very ill, underlying conditions, and people can not like me if they don't want, but I don't need that. Do you have other thoughts about, right, we know that the employment for everyone is going to change in the next decade. I mean, AI, automation, and I'm suggesting that COVID is going to even speed up the sort of I was going to say evolution, but probably revolution of employment. Do you have any thoughts on that at all? The whole technology, how blind people can not be replaced in the workforce?
Well, as you know, I came to Wichita to work for Envision, and my charter there was the Workforce Innovation Center, and to look at ways to really radically make a difference in the abysmal unemployment of blind people. And there's probably no problem that's more significant than that one. And I've got to say that's not a one-man job. Many agencies and organizations are trying to change that and have tried all sorts of techniques, and it's a huge problem. And what the workaround is for that, I'm sure it's multifaceted, but I don't know what it is at this point, but that's something that hopefully somebody will address and make a dent in.
Well, we'll probably pull you in. We have President Riccobono. We're about to wrap up. We have a couple more we're going to wrap up. But President Riccobono has not long ago appointed a special select committee to work on these issues. I happen to be one of the I think they let me tag along, but I happen to be one of the people on this committee. I'm very concerned about, what do blind people do? Do we go back to cottage industries? Do we, what is our future as this? We're going to have major change in society, and we need to make sure that we fit and have opportunities. And I don't know what that looks like, but we're going to work on it. So since you're a pioneer, I'm sure we'll be engaging your brain power, whether you can see or whether you're blind. We don't really care, Mike, by the way. Do we have one or two more that we can get to before we wrap, Kev?
We've got Jan Ahmed.
Jan, quickly.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My question is, I'm going a little bit farther back, and if you've answered it, tell me you've answered it. I'll try and check it out. So I've read the book. Hi, Mike. I've read your book, and I'm wondering, after you wrote the book, between then and now, have you noticed any changes? Are there any surprises that you, things that you kind of didn't even realize might have been affected or were affected or weren't affected? Are things growing? Are there new is there new pathways in your brain? I mean, I don't, the medical part, the brain part is really interesting to me.
Well,
So
the short answer is the best thing about the 20 years since it happened is that I don't think about it, unless I'm talking in a situation like this. So it's really become integrated into my life, into my thinking. And early on, I did think about it a lot, and I processed it. I had to figure out when to shut the vision on and off. And so once I integrated it with my blindness skills, I was able to shut that down. So from a medical standpoint or a vision standpoint, there have been some improvements, but it's mostly about it just become part of my life and how I operate.
So back briefly to the discussion about employment, I want to remind our regular Mountain Time callers that tomorrow night we're having a major discussion on this topic. We'll have some special guests. And so if you're really looking for something to do before you start your Memorial Day drinking or whatever it is you do, you might want to join us for another Mountain Time at 5. Mike, I mean, I think I speak on behalf of all of our folks joining. We really appreciate you sharing, and you've shared very freely, very transparently, and bless you, man. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're still a pioneer with us, man. Thank you very much for doing it.
Thanks for the questions, for your great interview, and I'll just close with one quick story. When the book came out, after one of the book signings, there were a bunch of people were lined up to talk to me, and this one person said, I want to introduce myself and my son. He says, I was on a chairlift in Mount Bachelor riding up a chair, and I told you, hey, we've got a baby who's just born, he's 6 months old. What can you tell me about raising him? And I've got about a minute left on the chairlift, so I'm thinking, oh, what do I tell this guy? Life changing. He reminds me of this at the book sign. He says, what you said to me was, love the heck out of him and teach him that there's always a way. And he said, that's the way we raised him. He's now 18 years old, a freshman at UC Berkeley, and we thank you for that.
Nice, man. Well, let me just say this. We love the heck out of you, and, people need to get out of your way, man, because you're still crashing through.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks all of you, and we'll see you sometime.
God bless you all. Good night from Mountain Time at 5.
Bye-bye.